The ballroom of the Astor Mansion was so bright that it seemed as though the crystal chandeliers had absorbed all of London's light and were now releasing it, bathing the parquet floor in a golden glow. In the far corner, musicians tuned their instruments, the drawn-out sounds of the violins mingling with the hum of voices and the rustle of expensive fabrics. The air was filled with the scent of lilies. Their snow-white blossoms adorned every column, every windowsill, and every corner of the hall. Father had spared no expense for this evening. The engagement of his eldest daughter to the Marquis of Somerset's heir was an event that would be talked about all season. Evelyn stood by the tall window, her shoulder pressed against the heavy velvet curtain, watching the guests. Her pale blue muslin dress, with its high waist and short puffed sleeves, was elegant yet modest. There was no embroidery or lace, just a simple satin ribbon under the bust. Standing next to Selina, Evelyn always felt like a shadow, pale and inconspicuous, and ignored by everyone. Selina, on the other hand, shone. Her ivory dress, embroidered with silver thread and pearls, shimmered with every movement. Her dark curls were styled high, revealing her long neck, which was adorned with a diamond necklace, a gift from her fiancé. She stood in the center of the hall, surrounded by guests, laughing with confidence and ease, as the powerful do. Standing slightly apart next to her was Lord Richard Somerset. Evelyn was seeing him for the first time. Previously, he had been nothing more than a name in her father's letters and a topic of conversation at the dinner table. The heir to the Marquisate, a good match, a bright future. But now he was here in person, and Evelyn couldn't take her eyes off him. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the straight posture of a military man. His dark, slightly curly hair was combed neatly back from his forehead. His black frock coat fit him perfectly. His snow-white tie was tied with the casual elegance that only comes with being accustomed to high society. But it wasn't his clothes that attracted attention. It was his face. He had sharp, defined features, dark eyes under straight eyebrows, and thin lips pressed into an almost imperceptible line. He was handsome, exuding a stern, reserved beauty that didn't require smiles, and he hardly ever smiled. Evelyn noticed this immediately. Standing next to Selina, he nodded to guests and answered questions, but his face remained impassive and almost cold. Only when someone said something particularly stupid did a barely noticeable, ironic, and slightly contemptuous smile appear at the corners of his mouth. He carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who knows his own worth and does not need the approval of others. Evelyn. She flinched and turned around. Her mother was standing nearby. Her whole face showed displeasure. "Why are you hiding in the corner? Go and talk to the guests. You look like a gatecrasher at your own family celebration." "I'm sorry, Mum," Evelyn said quietly. "I just—" "What?" her mother asked, narrowing her eyes. "Are you jealous of your sister? Don't ruin her evening with your sour expression. Selina deserves this happiness. She's beautiful, intelligent, and well-mannered. And you," she gave her daughter a critical look, "you should be grateful that you can even attend such an event." Evelyn swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. Her mother turned and left. Her heavy burgundy velvet dress rustled across the parquet floor. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. She wasn't jealous. Not in the way her mother thought, at least. She truly wanted Selina to be happy. Her older sister had always been kind to her. But how kind could the star of Kenny really be? Selina had never been cruel. She just didn't notice. She didn't notice Evelyn sitting in the corner of the living room when their suitors came to visit. She didn't notice how the dance teachers always chose her to demonstrate the steps. She didn't notice how their father only ever talked about the future of one of his daughters. The music grew louder. The first dance was about to begin. Evelyn opened her eyes and saw Lord Somerset extend his arm to Selina. She placed her hand in his and they stepped into the center of the room. The guests parted to form a circle around them. This was their dance, the dance of the bride and groom. Everyone had to watch. They moved flawlessly. Selina floated. Her dress billowed like a cloud. Lord Somerset led her confidently, but without passion. It seemed more like a duty to be performed with dignity. His face remained impassive. Evelyn watched, feeling something tighten in her chest. It wasn't jealousy or envy. It was something else. Something sadder. Looking at this man, a stranger who would become a family member in a few months, she thought, He is unhappy. It was a strange feeling, almost absurd. How could she know? He was calm, reserved, and polite, the perfect groom from the perfect family. But there was emptiness in his eyes, the same emptiness that Evelyn knew all too well from her own reflection in the mirror. The dance ended. The guests applauded. Selina laughed, pressing her palm to her chest as if overwhelmed with happiness. Lord Somerset bowed to her briefly and formally and stepped aside. Then he looked up. Their eyes met. Evelyn froze. She couldn't move or look away. He was looking at her from across the room, and there was something in his dark eyes, surprise and curiosity. It lasted only a moment, though, before someone spoke to him, and he turned his head. Evelyn took a step back and pressed her back against the cold wall. Her heart was beating too fast. It was silly. He had just happened to look in her direction. Nothing more. The evening dragged on slowly. Evelyn tried several times to slip away unnoticed, but each time her mother's gaze brought her back. She stood by the wall, answering the polite questions of the few guests who paid her any attention and trying not to look in his direction. But she kept looking. He danced with one lady after another, as etiquette demanded. He was discussing the estate with Lord Hanbury. His voice was low and calm. He talked about politics with Evelyn's father, who nodded in approval. The perfect son-in-law, the perfect match. Then he looked at her again. This time, Evelyn did not look away. She looked back and felt an invisible connection stretching between them, like a taut string. He was standing by a column, holding a glass of wine, his eyebrows slightly furrowed as if he were trying to understand something. Evelyn felt her cheeks flush and turned sharply towards the window. "Excuse me," came a voice nearby. She turned and froze. Lord Somerset was standing 2 steps away from her. "I haven't introduced myself," he said. His voice was just as she had imagined, deep and slightly husky, with a barely perceptible note of weariness. "Richard Somerset, I know," Evelyn replied, her voice sounding quieter than intended. "I mean, I?" "Evelyn." "Evelyn Astor, the younger sister," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." He nodded and fell silent. The silence dragged on, becoming awkward. Evelyn didn't know what to say. What was he doing here anyway? Why wasn't he with Selina? "Aren't you going to dance?" he finally said. "No one asked me. That's strange." Evelyn flinched in surprise. Looking up, she saw that he was watching her intently, as if trying to read something in her face. "Strange," she repeated. "Yes," he said, taking a sip of wine. "Usually at balls like this, everyone dances, especially the young ladies. I don't really like balls," Evelyn admitted. "Me neither." She blinked, not expecting that answer. He smiled, barely perceptibly, lifting one corner of his mouth. "But we're both here," he added. "For a long time," she repeated quietly. He fell silent again, looking somewhere above her head out of the window where the night was growing darker behind the glass. "I've seen you before," he said suddenly. 3 weeks ago, in Hyde Park, you were reading a book under a tree." Evelyn froze. She remembered that day. Selina had gone out visiting, and she had run away to the park with a volume of Byron's poems. She hadn't wanted anyone to see her. "I didn't think anyone noticed," she whispered. "I noticed." His voice was different, not cold like before, but warmer. She looked up and saw that he was looking at her in a way that no one ever had before. He was looking at her attentively and seriously, as if she were a person, not a shadow or a younger sister. "Richard!" Selina's clear voice rang out. They both started. Selina was walking towards them, smiling. Her dress shimmered in the candlelight. "There you are. Everyone's been looking for you. Lord Bentley wants to discuss next year's hunt, and your father has asked you to come and see him." She noticed Evelyn and frowned slightly. "Evie, why are you standing in the corner again?" "Go and see Aunt Beatrice. She was asking about your health." "Yes, of course." Evelyn lowered her gaze, but before she could walk away, Lord Somerset spoke up. "Lady Selina, may I have your permission to invite your sister to the next dance?" There was a moment of silence. Selina blinked, clearly not expecting such a question. Evelyn felt the ground slip away from under her feet. "My sister?" Selina repeated, her voice tinged with confusion. "But of course, if you wish. Evie is a good dancer, though she doesn't often go to balls. Thank you." He turned to Evelyn and held out his hand. She stared at his palm, unable to move. It was wrong. It was too strange. Why would he want to dance with her? But she placed her hand in his. His fingers were warm and strong. He led her to the center of the room, and Evelyn could feel all eyes on them. She could hear the guests whispering and see the surprise on their faces. Selena stood by the column smiling, but her smile seemed forced. The music began, a slow waltz. Richard put his arm around her waist, and Evelyn could feel her heart beating so loudly that she thought the whole room must be able to hear it. They started to dance, and she realized that he danced completely differently with her than with Selena. With Selena, he was formal and proper. Now, however, he was leading her carefully and almost tenderly, as if he were afraid of making a mistake. Why, she whispered, looking at his tie and not daring to look up. Why what? Why did you ask me to dance? He was silent for a few seconds. Then he spoke softly, so softly that only she could hear him. Because I wanted to. Evelyn looked up. Their faces were close together. She could see golden sparks in his dark eyes. There was a thin scar on his temple, intention in his jawline, and something else that made her breath catch. This isn't right, she whispered. I know, but he didn't let her go. They continued dancing, and Evelyn felt the world around her dissolve. Only the two of them remained, the music and that strange, frightening, impossible feeling in her chest. When the dance ended, he released her and bowed. Evelyn curtsied in return, then quickly walked away without looking at him. Her hands were shaking. She made her way through the crowd of guests, stepped out into the corridor, and leaned against the cold wall, covering her face with her hands. What had just happened? She didn't know what had just happened, but she understood one thing for sure, her life had just changed, and there was no turning back. Richard Somerset did not sleep that night. He lay in his bedroom in his Berkeley Square mansion, staring at the ceiling where the shadows from the street lamps painted bizarre patterns. Outside, London was gradually falling silent. The last carriages had passed, the drunken voices had faded, and the special silence of the early hours had descended, when the city was still asleep, but already preparing to wake up. But he couldn't close his eyes because, every time he tried, he saw her. Not Selena, his fiancée, with whom he had exchanged vows and who would become his wife in 3 months. No, he saw his younger sister, the girl who had stood at the window, pressed against the curtain as if trying to dissolve into Evelyn's velvet folds. Her name echoed in his head over and over again, like a line from a forgotten song. He turned onto his side, threw off the blanket in irritation, and got up. He walked barefoot to the window and threw it open. The cool night air hit his face, bringing with it the smell of damp earth and the distant Thames. Richard leaned against the windowsill, closed his eyes, and tried to banish the images, but they were too vivid. He could remember everything, how she had stood at the window in that simple, almost girlish, pale blue muslin dress. She wore no adornments except a thin ribbon under her chest and no jewelry except a small, old-fashioned cameo necklace that was clearly inherited. Her dark blonde hair was simply styled. Soft curls framed her face, and at the back, they were gathered into a low knot from which unruly strands escaped. Selena's low hairstyle with curls and pearls, something more natural and homely. But it wasn't the hairstyle, it was her face. Richard opened his eyes and looked at the darkening sky. He had seen many beautiful women. Everyone agreed that Selena was beautiful. She had perfect features, bright eyes, and porcelain skin. But when he looked at her, he felt nothing. He felt emptiness and cold approval, similar to the feeling one gets when buying a good horse or making a successful land purchase. And Evelyn? Evelyn was not a classic beauty. Her face was pale and almost transparent, with a slight blush that appeared and disappeared when she was nervous. Her straight nose had a barely noticeable scattering of freckles on the bridge. High society would consider this a flaw and try to hide it with powder. Her lips were thin, yet softly curved. When she spoke, her lower lip trembled slightly, betraying her excitement. She had a stubborn chin with a small dimple, but her eyes, my God, her eyes, were gray. They weren't bright or sparkling like Selena's. They were quiet and deep, like morning mist over a river or rain clouds before a storm. When she looked at him, Richard felt that she saw more than others did, that she understood him in a way that no one else ever had, and it frightened him. He ran his hand over his face and cursed softly. It was madness, absolute, unforgivable madness. He was engaged. In 3 months, he would marry Selena Astor, unite two families, and fulfill his duty. His father had already drawn up the marriage contract. Selena's mother was discussing the wedding details. Everything had been decided, signed, and agreed upon. Yet he couldn't stop thinking about her sister. How her hand had trembled when he led her in the dance. How she had tried not to look at him, instead staring at his tie. How thin her waist had felt under his palm, making him afraid to squeeze too hard. He thought about how her hair smelled, not of heavy French perfume like Selena's, but of something light and floral, roses and lavender, and how she had whispered, "This is wrong." She was right. It was wrong. But at that moment, when their eyes met and he felt her closeness, when the music surrounded them like an invisible wall, separating them from the rest of the world, he didn't care. Richard abruptly turned away from the window and returned to the bed. He sat on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. He was 32 years old. He had survived the war, witnessed death, lost friends, and returned home with shrapnel in his shoulder and nightmares filling his mind. He had learned to control himself, his emotions, and his desires. He had become what society expected of him, an heir, an aristocrat, and a man of duty. Yet now, one glance from those gray eyes was destroying everything he had so carefully built. He remembered that day in Hyde Park. 3 weeks earlier, he had been riding down the avenue on his way back from a meeting with his father's solicitor. It was morning, the sun had just risen, and the park was almost empty. And then he saw her. She was sitting under an old oak tree with her legs tucked under her and a book on her lap. Her plain white batiste dress with a small floral pattern was slightly creased, and her straw hat lay on the grass nearby, her hair loose. She had removed her hairpins and plaited her hair, throwing the plait over her shoulder. She was completely absorbed in her book, her lips moving silently as she repeated the lines. Richard stopped his horse and watched her. He didn't know who she was, just a girl in the park. No one would have paid her any attention. There was nothing bright, flashy, or eye-catching about her. Yet he couldn't take his eyes off her. Then she looked up as if she had sensed someone's gaze, and their eyes met. She jumped to her feet, quickly closed the book, and grabbed her hat. He managed to see the title on the spine, The Pilgrimage by Child of the Sea by Harold Byron. She turned and walked away quickly, almost running, and he never learned her name. However, he remembered her face. 3 weeks later, he saw her at a ball. She was his fiancée's younger sister, the same girl from the park, and he realized that all was lost. The morning dawned gray and damp. The sky was overcast, and a light fog hung over the streets. Richard put on a dark blue frock coat and went to the club, hoping that his usual routine of reading the newspapers, drinking brandy, and discussing politics would distract him. However, as soon as he entered the hall, he heard a familiar voice that made him want to turn around and leave. "Somerset, there you are. Congratulations, my dear fellow. I heard about your engagement." Sir Edward Craven, a red-faced elderly gentleman with bushy sideburns, slapped him on the shoulder. "Lady Selena is a splendid match, beautiful, rich, devoted, and with an impeccable reputation. Your father must be pleased." "Very much so," Richard replied dryly. "When is the wedding?" "In 3 months, in July." "Wonderful." Edward ordered 2 more glasses of port. "Are you in love, my boy?" The question hung in the air. Richard slowly looked up and met Edward's gaze. The old man smiled. "I understand. Marriages of convenience rarely begin with love, but that's okay. It will come with time, or it won't. The important thing is to fulfill your duty, produce an heir, and preserve the family honor." He shrugged at everything else. Well, men have their own ways of dealing with boredom. Richard clenched his jaw. He knew what Edward was talking about. Mistresses, theater actresses, and courtesans. Most aristocrats live like this. A wife to continue the family line, and a mistress for pleasure. His own father made no secret of his affairs. His mother knew about them and kept quiet because that was the accepted norm. However, the thought of living like that made Richard feel sick. "I'm not looking for ways to cope with boredom," he said quietly. "I'm looking for something else." "What is it?" Richard finished his wine and put the glass on the table. "If I knew," he said, standing up. "I'm sorry, Edward, I have to go." He left the club without waiting for an answer. It was drizzling outside. Richard turned up the collar of his coat and walked, not knowing where he was going. He just walked, feeling the cold drops settle on his face. Then he saw her. Evelyn was standing at a bookstall on Piccadilly. She was wearing a dark green pillbox hat with a high collar, and her hood was half covering her face. She was holding an open book and reading it, standing in the rain as if she couldn't feel it. Richard stopped a few steps away, unable to move. She turned the page and a faint smile appeared on her lips. He had never seen her smile before. At the ball, she had seemed so tense and alert, but now, alone with her book, she looked happy. "Lady Evelyn," he called out before he could stop himself. She started and turned abruptly. The book slipped from her hands and fell into a puddle. Evelyn gasped and bent down to pick it up, but Richard beat her to it. He picked up the book and wiped it with his coat sleeve. The cover was wet, but the pages were intact. "Letters on Botany for a Lady, Rousseau." "I'm sorry," said Evelyn, holding out her bayonet end. "I didn't mean to. You startled me. I'm the one who should be apologizing." He handed her the book. "You shouldn't have come up so suddenly." She took the book and clutched it to her chest. For a few seconds, they just stood there looking at each other. The rain intensified. Water ran down the hood of her pelisse and dripped onto her nose. She brushed it away irritably. "Do you like botany?" Richard asked, not knowing what else to say. "Yes," I replied. She lowered her gaze. "I mean, I'm interested in plants, their structure, and their life cycle. It's calming. It's calming. They don't demand anything in return. They just grow, living without intrigue or pretense." Richard felt something tighten in his chest. He knew that feeling well. He knew it all too well. "Are you alone?" he asked, looking back. "Where is your companion?" "Miss Reynolds is waiting in the carriage. Her feet hurt, so I let her stay there. I just wanted—" She hesitated. "I just wanted to be alone for a while." "I understand." Silence again. The rain was pouring down harder, and Richard realized that they were both completely soaked. "Let me walk you to the carriage," he said to Suque. "No, thank you. I'm Lady Evelyn." Her voice became firmer. "You're wet. Your carriage is far away." She shook her head. "It's around the corner on Germain Street." He offered her his arm. She hesitated, then cautiously accepted it. They walked in silence, and Richard could feel the warmth of her palm, despite her wearing gloves. The streets were almost empty. All sensible people had taken shelter from the rain. Only the two of them walked along the wet pavement, their footsteps sounding lonely in the silence. "Lord Somerset," she said quietly without looking at him. "That dance at the ball. Please don't do that again." He stopped. So did she. "Why?" he asked. Evelyn looked up, and he saw fear in her gray eyes. Not just fear, but despair. "My mother has already asked why you invited me," she said. Selina laughed, but I could see she was surprised. "You shouldn't," she said. "We shouldn't be here like this. Just the two of us. We shouldn't be here like this. Just the two of us." Richard took a step closer. The rain poured down between them, but they seemed oblivious to it. "And yet here we are," he said, quietly. "It's a mistake, I know. So why?" "Because I can't." He almost whispered the words. "I can't stop thinking about you." Evelyn turned pale. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. She just looked at him with wide eyes that mirrored the torment in his soul. "You can't say that," she finally whispered. "You're marrying my sister." "I know, then please forget about me." She pulled her hand away and ran off. Richard watched her disappear around the corner. Her dark green figure dissolved into the gray, rainy mist. He didn't follow her because she was right. He had to forget. He had to return to his perfect bride, his perfect marriage, and his perfect, empty life. But his heart wouldn't listen to his mind. Richard Somerset realized that, for the first time in 10 years, he was truly feeling something. It had been 2 weeks, 14 days, since Evelyn last saw Lord Somerset. She knew this for sure because she had been counting the pauses, hours, and minutes since their meeting in the rain, when he said what he shouldn't have. Words she had tried to forget, but which echoed in her head over and over again like an obsessive melody. "I can't stop thinking about you. I can't stop thinking about you." She sat in the morning room of the Oster mansion, pretending to embroider. The hoop lay on her lap, and the needle moved mechanically, creating a meaningless pattern on the white canvas. Outside, May rain fell persistently, turning the streets of London into a gray mess of mud and water. Wood crackled in the fireplace, filling the room with the smell of smoke and resin. Opposite her, in an armchair by the window, sat Selena. She was looking through a catalog of wedding dresses and occasionally showing her mother the models she particularly liked. Her new lilac muslin dress had long sleeves and a white lace collar and had been specially ordered from Madame Duval on Bond Street. Her hair was styled into an intricate arrangement of curls intertwined with satin ribbons. She looked perfect, as always. "Eve, look." Selena handed her a page from the catalog. "How do you like this dress? Not too frilly?" Evelyn looked up. The picture showed a white satin wedding dress embroidered with pearls and silver thread. It had a long train and a bodice studded with small diamonds. "Beautiful," she said, her voice sounding calmer than she had expected. But Selena narrowed her eyes. "I hear a but in your voice." "No buts. It really is beautiful. Richard hasn't seen it yet." "Of course, the groom isn't supposed to see the dress before the wedding. It's bad luck." Selena laughed and put the catalog aside. "He hasn't seen much of anything lately, though. I haven't seen him in almost 2 weeks. He sent a note saying that he was busy with business at his father's estate." She frowned. "Strange. Grooms are usually more attentive." Evelyn pricked her finger with a needle. A drop of blood appeared on her skin, bright and red. She quickly put her finger in her mouth and tasted a metallic flavor. "Maybe he really is busy," said her mother, without looking up from the letter she was reading. "Managing an estate takes time, and Lord Somerset is a responsible man." "It's still strange," Selena muttered. "We've been engaged for a month, and he acts as if we're barely acquainted." At the ball, he had been distant, impolite, but cold. She looked at Evelyn. "You danced with him, didn't you? What did you think of him?" Evelyn froze. Her heart was beating so loudly that she thought the whole house could hear it. "I don't know," she said. She looked down at her embroidery. "We hardly spoke. He doesn't talk much anyway." But Selena fell silent, twirling the weaver in her hands. "Sometimes I think he's unhappy, as if he's been forced into the marriage. Although that's silly, isn't it? Our marriage benefits both families." His father approved. "My father is pleased. Everything is perfect." "So why are you worried?" her mother asked, finally looking up from her letter. Selena shrugged. "I don't know. I just feel like something is wrong." Evelyn clenched the embroidery hoop so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She couldn't sit there any longer, listening to Selena talk about him, the wedding and a future that would never be. Or would, but without her. She stood up, dropping the embroidery hoop onto the floor. "Sorry, I need to lie down. I have a headache." "Another headache." Her mother frowned. "You need to get more fresh air. You spend too much time with your books." "Yes, Mom." Evelyn left the living room and closed the door behind her. The hallway was cool and quiet. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes, trying to catch her breath. 2 weeks, 14 days. She couldn't stop thinking about him, how he had looked at her in the rain, how his voice had sounded when he had said those words, how her heart had beaten when he had stood next to her. It was madness, dangerous, destructive madness. She climbed the stairs to the second floor and went into her room. It was small and modest, with a single window overlooking the courtyard. It was nothing like Selena's spacious bedroom, complete with silk curtains and French furniture. But Evelyn loved this space. Here, she could be herself. She went to the window and looked down. The rain was still falling, turning the courtyard into a miniature lake. The old apple tree in the corner swayed, dropping its last white petals. Soon it would be summer, hot and dusty. London society would scatter to their country estates. In July, Selena would become Richard Somerset's wife. But what would become of her? She would remain here, unnoticed, a shadow, a younger sister, an old maid. She would attend family dinners and watch them together. She would smile when Selena talked about her happy married life, and each time it would hurt her a little more. The letter arrived the next day. Evelyn recognized the handwriting immediately. Large, clear letters adorned the envelope. The letter was addressed to the entire Astor family. She took it from the silver tray in the hall, feeling her hands tremble. At breakfast, her mother opened the envelope and read the letter aloud. The Marquis and Marchioness of Somerset were inviting the Astor family to spend the weekend at their Kent estate, Willowbrook. "We look forward to seeing you this Friday. With deepest respect, Marchioness Eleanor Somerset." "Willowbrook," exclaimed Selena, dropping her teaspoon. It's their ancestral estate. Richard told me about it. They say it has a stunning garden and a lake with swans. It's a great opportunity to get to know the family better, her mother nodded approvingly. And it's important for you, Selena, to see the house where you'll be living. I have to go, Evelyn said quietly. Everyone looked at her. Of course you do, her father said sharply, looking up from his newspaper for the first time at breakfast. It's an invitation for the whole family. It would be disrespectful if you stayed. But there are no ifs, ands, or buts. You're going, and you'll try to look presentable. I don't want the Somersets to think that we don't know how to raise our daughters properly. Evelyn looked down at her plate. A piece of buttered toast was cooling, untouched. She couldn't eat anymore. Friday came too quickly. They left early in the morning when London was still shrouded in fog. There were two carriages, one for her parents and Selena, and the other for Evelyn and her companion, Miss Reynolds, an elderly woman with a perpetually sour expression. The journey took 4 hours. First, they traveled along bumpy cobblestone pavements, then dusty, uneven dirt roads. Miss Reynolds slept the whole way, snoring quietly in the corner of the carriage. Evelyn looked out of the window. London was behind them now, and green hills, groves, and villages with thatch-roofed houses came into view. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and wildflowers. Birds were singing somewhere. After the noisy city, the world seemed peaceful, almost unreal. But inside her, however, there was a hurricane. Ululu Brook appeared suddenly around a bend in the road. Evelyn gasped. The estate was enormous. The main house, made of gray stone, stood on a hill surrounded by a park filled with centuries-old oak trees. It had 3 floors, 2 wings, and many windows sparkling in the half-light of the sun. In front of the house was a neat lawn, sloping down to a lake where white swans swam. Behind the house were stables and a glass-roofed greenhouse. Beyond that were endless fields and forests. The carriages stopped at the main entrance. Servants in livery stood in a line. The butler, a tall, thin man with gray temples, bowed. Welcome to Ululu Brook. The Marquise and Lord Richard are waiting for you in the drawing room. Evelyn was the last to step out of the carriage. Her dark blue silk dress, with its long sleeves and modest neckline, was one of the finest in her wardrobe. However, standing next to Selena in her cream-embroidered satin gown, she felt like a gray mouse again. They entered the house. The hall was enormous, with marble floors and a sweeping staircase leading up to the first floor. Portraits of stern men in wigs and women in stiff corsets hung on the walls. The air was filled with the scent of beeswax and old wood. The butler led them into the living room. The room was bright, with tall windows and French-style furniture. Standing by the fireplace was a woman of about 50 in a strict steel-gray dress. Her hair was tucked under a bonnet. Her face was cold, yet beautiful. It was clear that she had been beautiful in her youth. She nodded to Evelyn's parents. Lady Astor, Lord Astor, she said, I am delighted to welcome you to Willowbrook. I am Eleanor Somerset. They exchanged pleasantries. The Marquise was polite but distant. Her gaze slid over Selena, lingering for a moment as she assessed her, then moved to Evelyn. Something flashed in her eyes, curiosity and puzzlement, but it disappeared immediately. My son is delayed, she said. He rode out early this morning and has not yet returned, but I am sure he will be here by dinner time. Selena looked disappointed but quickly hid it with a smile. They were shown to their rooms. Evelyn was given a small bedroom in the east wing with a garden view. The room was modest but cozy. It contained a high 4-poster bed, a dressing table with a mirror, and an armchair by the window. The maid unpacked her things and left. Evelyn went to the window. Below, the garden stretched out before her, with its neat paths, rose beds, and ivy-covered gazebo. Further away, she could see a greenhouse. Beyond that, stretching away beyond the hedge, was a forest. She stood there for a long time until she heard the sound of hooves. A rider appeared from behind the trees. A black stallion. A man in a dark riding coat was riding it. Even from a distance, Evelyn recognized him. Richard. He rode up to the stable, dismounted lightly, and handed the reins to the groom. Then he stood there, stroking the horse's muzzle. Evelyn saw him say something to the animal. The stallion snorted and nudged his shoulder with his nose, making Richard laugh. Evelyn had never seen him laugh before. It changed his face, making him look younger. The stern mask he wore in public disappeared. For a moment, he was just a free and happy man. Then he raised his head and looked at the house. Their eyes met. He froze. Evelyn couldn't breathe. They looked at each other across the garden, and time stood still. Then someone called out to him, and he turned away. Evelyn stepped back from the window and pressed her palm to her chest. Her heart was beating so hard it hurt. What was she doing? What was happening to her? Lunch was torture. They gathered in the dining room around a long, dark oak table adorned with silver candlesticks and porcelain bearing the Somerset crest. The Marquis, Richard's father, was a silent man with gray hair and a penetrating gaze. He sat at the head of the table, listening mostly to the wives' conversation, speaking little himself. Richard sat opposite Evelyn. He had changed, now wearing a black tailcoat and white tie. His hair was damp from washing. He looked reserved, almost cold, and did not look at her, or at anyone else for that matter. Selina sat next to him, chattering away about London, fashion, and the upcoming wedding. Richard nodded and answered in monosyllables, but his voice sounded mechanical. "Do you like horse riding, Lord Somerset?" Evelyn's mother asked. "Yes," he replied, taking a sip of wine. "It's the only thing that allows me to think." "What are you thinking about?" Selina asked unexpectedly. Richard looked up, and for the first time during dinner, he looked straight ahead. But not at Selina, he looked at Evelyn. "Things I shouldn't," he said quietly. There was silence. Everyone looked at him. The Marquis frowned. Evelyn's father cleared his throat. "Young people always think too much," he said with a strained laugh. "It will pass with age." The conversation continued, but Evelyn could no longer hear the words. She stared at her plate, feeling the blood pound in her temples. After lunch, everyone dispersed to rest before dinner. Evelyn returned to her room, but she couldn't sit still. She paced around, then grabbed her shawl and went out into the hallway. The house was quiet. Everyone was resting. She went downstairs, then out through the side door into the garden. The air was warm and humid, smelling of roses and freshly cut grass. Evelyn walked along the path, not knowing where she was going. She was just trying to calm down and collect her thoughts. Then she heard Lady Evelyn's voice. She turned abruptly. Richard was standing by the gazebo. He was still wearing his tailcoat, but his tie was undone and his hair was tousled as if he had run his hand through it. "Lord Somerset," she said, her voice trembling, "I didn't know you were here. I was waiting for you." She froze. Waiting. He took a step closer. "I saw you leave the house. I followed you." He fell silent and looked at her. "I need to talk to you." "We have nothing to talk about." "Evelyn, don't call me that." She stepped back. "It's not right." "I know." His voice broke. "God, I know it's wrong, but I can't stay silent any longer. I thought that if I kept my distance, it would go away. I thought that if I didn't see you, it would go away. But it didn't. It only got worse." Evelyn felt tears welling up in her eyes. "You shouldn't be telling me this. You're engaged to my sister. Do you think I don't know?" He ran his hand over his face. "I remember it every second, and every second, I hate myself for how I feel." "Then stop." She almost shouted. "Stop before it's too late. Marry Selina. Forget about me. I'll leave. I'll ask my father to send me to my aunt in Derbyshire. You won't have to see me again. Just stop." Richard looked at her, and the pain in his eyes took her breath away. "I can't," he whispered. "Even if you go to the ends of the earth and I never see you again, I won't be able to forget because you are—" He took another step, and now there were only a few inches between them. "You are the only real thing that has happened to me in the last 10 years." Evelyn gasped. He raised his hand slowly and carefully and touched her cheek. The touch was light, almost weightless, but it burned. "Richard," she whispered, saying his name aloud for the first time. He leaned closer. His breath touched her lips. One more moment. "Richard, where are you?" Selina's voice broke the spell like a whip crack. They recoiled from each other. Richard spun away, hiding his face. Evelyn pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to stifle a sob. Selina appeared from around the bend in the path. Her pink organdy dress billowed behind her. A straw hat with ribbons was perched on her head. "There you are," she smiled. "I've been looking for you. Your mother says we need to discuss the guest list for the wedding." She stopped short when she noticed Evelyn. "Evie, what are you doing here?" I was out for a walk, Evelyn whispered. Evelyn whispered. Selena looked at her, then at Richard. Something flashed in her eyes. Suspicion. One. Yes. I just needed some air. I see. Selena smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. Richard, let's go. Mother is waiting. She took his arm. Richard did not resist. They walked back to the house. Evelyn saw Selena say something to Richard, hear him laugh, and see her press closer to him. He did not look back. Evelyn remained standing alone in the garden, surrounded by roses and silence, and realized for the first time that love is misfortune. Love is a curse. Dinner passed in tense silence. More precisely, everyone talked about the weather, politics, and the summer season in Brighton. But behind this social gloss, there was something sharp and dangerous. Evelyn felt it with every fiber of her being. She picked at her roast duck and orange sauce with her fork, trying not to look in Richard's direction. But she could feel his gaze on her constantly. It burned the back of her neck, her shoulders, and her arms. She knew that if she looked up, she would see him and everything would come crashing down. All of the fragile facade of propriety and pretense that she had constructed so carefully would crumble. Selena was quieter than usual too. She sat next to Richard wearing a champagne-colored dress with a plunging neckline sprinkled with tiny pearls. Her hair was styled into an elaborate updo and adorned with a sapphire tiara, a gift from her future mother-in-law. She looked like a queen, but her smile had grown colder, and when she looked at her sister Evelyn, her eyes were full of questions that she could not answer. Lady Evelyn, the Marquise's voice made her start. I hear you are interested in botany. All eyes turned to her. Evelyn felt the color rise to her cheeks. Yes, milady, she replied quietly. It's more of a hobby than a serious study. There was a hint of irony in the Marquise's voice. My gardener, Tompkins, mentioned that he saw a young lady in our greenhouse today. I suppose it was you. Evelyn lowered her gaze. After our encounter in the garden, she couldn't bring herself to go back to the house. She wandered around the grounds and stumbled upon the greenhouse. It was a huge glass building full of exotic plants. She had gone in hoping that the solitude and silence would calm the storm in her soul. I'm sorry if I broke any rules, she murmured. I didn't mean to, on the contrary. The Marquise took a sip of wine. I'm glad someone appreciates my collection. Most guests find the greenhouse boring. She looked at Selena, and there was something appraising in her gaze. Are you also interested in plants, Lady Selena? Oh no, Selena laughed, but it sounded forced. I prefer to admire flowers in vases. Digging in the dirt and studying roots is not my thing. I see. The Marquise nodded and said no more, but Evelyn felt the air grow even colder. After dinner, the ladies retired to the music room, leaving the men behind with their briefcases and cigars. The room was exquisite. It had cream walls, gilded moldings, a large pianoforte by the window, and a harp in the corner. The fireplace was lit, despite the warm evening, and the air smelled of rose oil from the lamps. Lady Selena, you play the piano, don't you? Asked the Marquise, settling into an armchair. Yes, milady, Selena beamed. Finally, a chance to show off her skills. I was taught by Signor Venturi from Italy. Then let us hear you play, said the Marquise. Selena walked over to the piano, sat down and adjusted her skirts. Her fingers ran over the keys and a Mozart melody began to play. It was technically perfect, fast and brilliant. She played well. That was obvious. Every note was in place and every chord was clear, but the music lacked soul. Evelyn leaned back against the sofa and listened, thinking about how much the music resembled Selena herself. Beautiful on the outside, empty on the inside. Beautiful on the outside, empty on the inside. No, that was unfair. Selena wasn't bad. She was just different. She lived in a world where appearance was more important than substance. The melody ended and the audience applauded. Selena bowed, beaming. Wonderful, said the Marquise, but there was no enthusiasm in her voice. And you, Lady Evelyn, do you play? A little. Evelyn tried to smile, but not as convincingly as Selena. Nevertheless, I would like to hear you. It was not a request. It was an order wrapped in politeness. Evelyn stood up, feeling her legs buckle beneath her. She walked over to the piano, sat down on the still warm bench, and placed her hands on the keys. What should she play? Her repertoire was modest. Her mother had never hired expensive teachers for her, Why waste money on her youngest daughter? Evelyn had taught herself using old sheet music that she had found in the library. She closed her eyes and began to play. It wasn't Mozart or Haydn, but an old English ballad, sad and slow, which she had once heard in a village church. The melody was simple, almost primitive, but it conveyed a deep sadness. It was the same sadness that Evelyn carried in her heart. As she played, the music flowed through her fingers, carrying with it all the things she could not say aloud: pain, longing, hopelessness, and forbidden love. When the last note faded away, the room fell silent. Evelyn opened her eyes and looked up. The men were standing in the doorway. They had returned from the smoking room, and Richard was among them. He looked at her as if he were seeing her for the first time. There was something in his eyes that she couldn't name: pain, admiration, or despair, perhaps. "It was," the Marquise began, then fell silent. She looked at Evelyn with a strange expression. "Unusual. Where did you learn that?" "Nowhere, milady," Evelyn replied quietly. "I just felt it." The Marquise nodded, and something flashed across her face: understanding and sympathy. But it disappeared so quickly that Evelyn decided she must have imagined it. "It's time for bed," Evelyn's mother announced, standing up. "We have a long day ahead of us tomorrow. The Marquise has promised to show us around the estate." Everyone began to disperse. Evelyn was walking toward the stairs when she heard Selina's voice. "Eva, wait." She turned around. Selina was standing in the candlelight at the foot of the stairs. Her face looked pale, almost ghostly. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly. "In your room now." Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed and clasped her hands together. Selina stood by the window, looking out into the darkness. They were silent for several minutes. Then, without turning around, Selina spoke. "What's going on between you and Richard?" Evelyn's heart skipped a beat. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me." Selina's voice was colder than Evelyn had ever heard it before. "I'm not blind. I can see how he looks at you, how you look at him, today in the garden. What happened there?" "Nothing. We were just talking." "About what?" Evelyn covered her face with her hands. "Selina, please, what?" Selina turned around and her eyes were shining with tears. "Are you in love with my fiancé?" "No," she replied. "You're lying." "I'm not." Evelyn's voice broke. "I didn't mean to. I swear I didn't mean to. It just happened." There was silence. Selina looked at her, tears slowly rolling down her cheeks and smudging her powder. "How long?" she whispered. "Since that night when we danced." "More than a month." Selina laughed, but it was a hysterical laugh. "You hid it for a month. For a month you watched me plan my wedding, choose my dress, and talk about our future together. And you said nothing. What was I supposed to say?" Evelyn jumped out of bed. "What should I do?" "Selina, I didn't ask for this. I didn't want to fall in love with someone who belongs to you, but I can't help it. I can't control how I feel. And he—" Selina took a step closer. "He feels the same way." Evelyn didn't answer. She didn't need to. The answer was written on her face. Selina turned pale. She took a step back, leaning her hand against the wall. "Oh my God," she whispered. "He loves you, Selina. Don't come near me." Selina raised her hand. "How could you? You're my younger sister. You had to. You've always lived in the shadows. Always. And now you're taking away the only thing I have left." "I didn't take anything away," Evelyn cried. "I didn't do anything. I tried to stay away. I tried to forget. I tried to be a good sister. But it didn't work. Do you want me to disappear? Fine, I'll leave. I'll leave tomorrow and never come back." "It won't help," Selina laughed through her tears. "Even if you leave, he won't love me. He'll always think of you, and I'll know. Every time he touches me, I'll know he's imagining you." Evelyn covered her mouth with her hand, stifling a sob. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry, Selina." Selina looked at her for a long time, then wiped her tears away and stood up straight. Her face became cold and impenetrable. "Tomorrow we're going back to London," she said in an even voice. "I'll tell my mother I'm not feeling well. Richard and I are getting married in a week, not in 3 months, but in a week. I'll talk to his mother and speed up all the preparations." "What?" "But you, Selina, will cease to exist for me. You are no longer my sister. After the wedding, I never want to see you again." She left, slamming the door behind her. Evelyn collapsed onto the bed and burst into tears. She didn't know how much time had passed, maybe an hour, maybe more. The tears dried, but the pain remained. It was heavy and oppressive, like a stone on her chest. Evelyn got up and went to the window. It was a dark, moonless night. The stars were hidden behind the clouds. Down in the garden, a single lantern burned by the gazebo, and a figure stood next to it. Evelyn froze. Even in the darkness, she recognized him. Richard. He stood motionless, looking at the house and her window. She knew he knew she was watching. Her hand reached for the window frame and pushed it open. The cold night air rushed in, bringing with it the scents of roses and damp earth. "Don't," she whispered into the darkness. "Please, don't." But he didn't leave. He continued to stand there. In that silence, more was said than in all the conversations they had ever had. Evelyn closed her eyes. She knew what she had to do. She knew that the only way to stop the madness, the pain, and the sin was to leave. She had to leave forever. But disaster struck the following morning. Evelyn woke up to screams. She jumped out of bed, threw on her dressing gown, and ran into the hallway. Servants were running back and forth, and someone was sobbing downstairs. She went downstairs and found a crowd in the hallway. Selina's mother was standing there with a handkerchief pressed to her face. Her father looked distraught. The Marquise was as pale as death. The butler was saying something quickly and pointing somewhere. "What happened?" Evelyn asked, pushing her way forward. Her mother turned around. Her face was wet with tears. "Selina," she whispered. "She's gone. She's not in her room. The bed hasn't been touched. The maid says she hasn't seen her since last night. We've searched the whole house. She's nowhere to be found." Evelyn felt the world sway. Perhaps she just went for a walk alone at night. Her father shook his head. "What nonsense! Selina would never do that." "We found this." The butler held out a note. Her mother took it with trembling hands and read it aloud. "I cannot marry a man who does not love me. I am sorry. Do not look for me, Selina." There was a dead silence. Then her mother screamed. Evelyn couldn't hear her. She stared at the note, the letters blurring before her eyes. Selina had run away. She had run away the night before her wedding, abandoning her family, her reputation, and her future because of her. "Where is Richard?" the Marquise suddenly asked. "Where is my son?" The butler turned pale. "Lord Somerset is also absent, milady. His bed is untouched. The groom says he took a horse and left during the night." All eyes turned to Evelyn. She took a step back and shook her head. "No," she whispered. "No, you don't understand. They're not together, Selina," she said, but no one listened. Her mother looked at her with horror and disgust. Her father was red with rage. The Marquise stood like a statue, but her eyes burned with cold anger. "What have you done?" whispered her mother. "What have you done, Evelyn?" Evelyn understood. They thought it was her, that she had stolen her sister's fiancé, that Selina had run away, and Richard had rushed after her. Or something else. She didn't know. She knew only one thing. Her life had just been completely destroyed. The door flew open and everyone turned around. Richard was standing in the doorway. He was wearing yesterday's clothes. His hair was tousled. There was dried blood on his cheek. He was holding onto the doorframe and breathing heavily. "I found her," he said hoarsely. "Selina! She's at the old mill 3 miles from here. She's alive. But what happened to her?" cried his mother. Richard slowly raised his gaze and looked straight at Evelyn. "She said she wanted to talk to you. Only you, before she left." In that look, Evelyn read her sentence. The carriage shook on the broken road. Evelyn sat clutching the edge of her seat, staring out of the window but not seeing the landscape. Richard sat silently beside her. They were alone. Her mother had insisted that he accompany her, and nobody had dared to object. The Marquise remained behind to reassure the guests. Her father had sent the servants out to search the neighborhood, while her mother locked herself in her room, clutching her smelling salts. The morning was gray and stifling. The sky was covered with heavy, leaden clouds, and there was a smell of thunder. The wind bent the trees along the road and tore off leaves, which swirled in the air like green snowflakes. Evelyn was still wearing her gray linen house dress with a simple white collar. There had been no time to change. She had hastily braided her hair, not securing it with pins. So now strands were falling out and onto her face. She threw a woolen shawl over her shoulders, even though it wasn't cold. She just wanted to cover herself up, to hide, to disappear. Richard hadn't changed either. His suit was rumpled, there was a dirt on his cuffs, and his tie had long since been torn off. He sat opposite her, leaning back and looking out of the window on the other side. His jaw was tense. There was dried blood in the corner of his mouth. It seemed he had fallen or hit something. The silence was unbearable. "Where did you find her?" Evelyn finally asked, unable to bear it any longer. Richard didn't answer right away. Then he turned his head, and there was such weariness in his eyes that her heart sank. "I didn't sleep last night," he said quietly. "I was standing in the garden thinking when I heard someone leave the house. I thought it was you." He paused. Evelyn lowered her gaze. "But it was Selina," he continued. "She was walking fast, almost running. She was wearing a hooded cloak and carrying a small bag. I called out to her, but she didn't stop. She ran towards the stables. I didn't understand what was going on, but I knew that something was wrong. I followed her and took a horse to ride after her." "Was she riding too?" "No, she was walking along the old forest road. I caught up with her at the bend in the road and tried to talk to her, but she screamed at me to leave her alone. She said he had run his hand over her face. She said that she would rather die than marry me." Evelyn gasped and ran on. "I tried to stop her and grabbed her arm, but she broke free, fell, and hit her head on a rock. I thought she was dead, but then she came to, pushed me away, and ran off again. I couldn't leave her. I followed her until she reached the old mill. She locked herself inside and didn't answer. I waited until dawn, then decided that I had to go back for help." Evelyn listened, and with every word it became harder for her to breathe. It was her fault. This whole disaster, this whole nightmare, was because of her. "She doesn't want to talk to me," Richard continued. "Only to you. I don't know why, but she kept repeating your name as I was leaving." The carriage braked sharply. The coachman called out to them, "Milady, my lord, there is no road ahead. You will have to walk." They got out. The wind immediately hit their faces, tearing at the hem of Richard's cloak and the bottom of Evelyn's dress. She looked around. They were standing at the edge of the forest. Ahead of them, among the trees, they could see a leaning stone tower. It was all that remained of the old mill. The roof had collapsed and moss covered the walls. Prickly bushes and weeds grew around it. Richard pointed to a narrow path leading into the thicket. It was a 10-minute walk. They set off. Richard walked ahead, pushing aside the branches. Evelyn followed him, stumbling over roots and catching her shawl on thorns. The forest was dark and damp, smelling of rotten leaves and wet earth. Somewhere in the distance, a bird cried out sharply and alarmingly. The mill appeared suddenly around a bend. It was taller than it had seemed from a distance, with narrow loophole windows and a heavy wooden door covered in rust. Right on the grass nearby lay a dark blue cloak, wet with dew. Richard stopped a few steps from the entrance. "Selenoga," he called. "I brought Evelyn." Silence. Only the wind rustled in the treetops. "Selina, please," Evelyn called. "It's me. Come out." There was a long pause. Then the door slowly opened and a pale face appeared in the gap. "Only you," Selina's hoarse voice sounded. "Let him stay outside." Richard looked at Evelyn. She nodded. He stepped back hesitantly, leaned against a tree next to Odell, and crossed his arms over his chest. Evelyn approached the door. It swung open wider and she went in. It was dark and cold inside. A dim light filtered through holes in the roof. The floor was littered with rubbish, broken beams, old sacks, and broken bricks. It smelled of mold and mice. Selina was sitting on a pile of hay in the corner. Evelyn barely recognized her sister. Yesterday's magnificent dress was torn and stained with mud. Her hair was tousled, her tiara was missing, and her curls hung down in dirty strands. There was a bruise on her forehead from the fall. Her face was swollen from crying, and her eyes were red. She wrapped her arms around her knees and rocked back and forth like a child. "Selina," Evelyn stepped closer. "Don't come any closer." Selina raised her hand. "Stay there." Evelyn froze. They stared at each other through the dusty twilight. "Why did you run away?" Evelyn asked quietly. "You knew you would cause a scandal." "What about the family?" "I don't care about the family," Selina replied, laughing hysterically. Selina laughed hysterically. "I don't care about a scandal. Do you even understand what I had to do? Marry him, become his wife, share his bed, bear his children, and know exactly what he thinks of you every second. Selena, I already told you I'm leaving. I promised. A promise. Selena jumped to her feet, staggering. Do you think that will change anything? Do you think that if you disappear, he'll suddenly start loving me? Are you that stupid? Or are you just pretending? Evelyn clenched her fists, feeling tears welling up in her throat. I don't know what else I can do. Tell me, I'll do anything. You can't, Selena cried, because what I need is for you not to exist, for him never to have seen you, for you not to have stood at the window at that ball, for you not to have read books in the park, for you not to have played that damn music last night. She was choking on her sobs. Do you know how I felt when he looked at you? When his face changed and he suddenly came alive? For the first time, I understood what it meant to be invisible, to be the person that nobody looks at. You should have felt that your whole life, not me. The words hit her like a slap. Evelyn stepped back, pressing her hand to her chest. Did you think about that? She whispered. Did you know that I did? Of course you did. Selena ran her hand over her face, smearing her tears. Everyone knew. Your parents, your aunts, the servants. Everyone could see that you were the one who was overlooked. And I liked it. I liked being the center of attention, getting everything I wanted and knowing that I was prettier and better than everyone else. But now it was her turn to drown. Now it's me they don't want. Evelyn didn't know what to say. Standing in that ruined mill, she listened to her sister shout out all the pain, anger, and envy that had built up over the years. She realized that they were both victims. One a victim of neglect, the other of her own pride. One a victim of neglect, the other a victim of her own pride. I didn't mean to hurt you, Evelyn finally said. I never meant to. But she had. Exhausted, Selena sat back down on the hay. And now it's all over. My reputation is ruined. I ran away the night before my wedding. By morning, the whole of London will know. No self-respecting man will ever propose to me again. I am doomed to become an old maid and a laughing stock. We can fix this, Evelyn said. Evelyn moved closer, kneeling beside her sister. Let's say you got lost. Let's say you've had enough of lying. Selena pushed her away. I'm tired of the lies, the pretense, this endless game of propriety. She looked at Evelyn, and there was something new in her eyes, determination. Do you know what I realized last night when I was running through the woods? That I never loved him. Never. He was just a good match, the right choice. I wanted to be the perfect bride, but I don't want to live like this. I don't want to marry a man who doesn't love me just for the title and status. So what will you do? Selena took a crumpled piece of paper from the folds of her dress. We have an aunt, Lady Beatrice, who is my father's sister and lives in Scotland. She never married. She has traveled all her life, written books, and never listened to anyone. My parents call her crazy, but I wrote to her a month ago, shortly after I realized that I didn't want the wedding. She replied that she would be ready to take me in if I decided to change my life. Evelyn looked at her sister with wide eyes. Are you going to Scotland? Yes, and I'm not coming back. Let them say what they want. Let my parents curse me. I'm going to live life on my own terms, not according to society's expectations. But that does mean I'm officially breaking off the engagement. Selena stood up and walked over to the broken window, looking out at the forest. Richard is free, and so are you. Do what you want. I am no longer standing between you. Evelyn stood up and shook her head. Selena, you don't understand. Even if you break off the engagement, we can't. Society would never accept him marrying his ex-fiancee's younger sister. It would be worse than any scandal. Then run away. Selena turned around, a bitter smile on her lips. Like me? Go somewhere where no one knows you. Start a new life. Isn't love worth it? Evelyn didn't know what to say. She had thought about it. She had thought about leaving with him 1,000 times, forgetting everything and living somewhere at the end of the world. But these were just fantasies, dreams that would never come true because Richard was a man of honor. He would never abandon his family, his title, or his inheritance for her. I can't ask him to do that, she whispered. Then you're a coward, said Selena, just like I was until this morning. She walked past Evelyn towards the door, but Evelyn grabbed her arm. Wait, are you really going to do this? You'll leave. You'll abandon everything. Selena looked at her. There was no anger in her eyes, only weariness and a strange calm. I made my choice when I left the house tonight. There's no turning back. She stepped outside. Richard pushed himself away from the tree and took a step towards her, but Selena raised her hand. Don't, my lord, she said firmly. You don't need to pretend anymore. I'm breaking off our engagement. Consider yourself free. Richard turned pale. Lady Selena, you mustn't. Let there be scandal. She lifted her chin. I'm tired of living for others. Tell my parents that I've gone to my aunt's in Scotland, that I won't be coming back, and that I alone am to blame for what has happened, not you or my sister. She looked at Evelyn, who was standing in the doorway of the mill. Goodbye, Evie. I hope you'll be happy, truly happy. She turned and walked down the path to the carriage. A few seconds later, her figure disappeared among the trees. Evelyn and Richard were left alone. They stood, unable to move. The wind picked up, bringing the first heavy drops of rain. The storm that had been forecast that morning had finally broken. We need to go back, said Richard, but he didn't move. Yes, Evelyn whispered. Yet they remained where they were. The rain fell harder and harder, turning into a downpour. Water poured from the sky in torrents, instantly soaking their clothes. Evelyn could feel cold streams running down her face and neck, soaking her dresses. Evelyn! Richard's voice was hoarse. What are we going to do? She looked at him. He stood in the rain, completely soaked. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and the water had darkened his face. He looked at her with such pleading and desperation that it took her breath away. I don't know, she admitted. Selena's right. Even if we broke off the engagement, we couldn't be together. Society. To hell with society. He stepped towards her. Can you hear me? To hell with society. To hell with the rules. To hell with everything. I can't live like this anymore. I can't pretend that I don't care. I can't pretend that you're just my ex-fiancée's younger sister. Richard, I love you, he cried, his voice breaking. God, I love you so much that I can't breathe. I can't sleep. I can't think about anything but you. Every time I close my eyes, I see your face, hear your voice, and remember the smell of your hair when we danced. I know it's wrong and crazy, but I don't care. Evelyn couldn't speak. Her tears mixed with the rain, and she didn't know what was running down her face. Rainwater or her own tears. Let's go, said Richard, taking her hands. Right now, we'll get in a carriage and go to Scotland or Ireland, anywhere. We'll start a new life. I'll find a job. I'll be a lawyer or a teacher or anything else. We don't need a title or money, we only need each other. You can't, she said, shaking her head. You're the heir. You have obligations, family, and duty. I choose you. He pulled her closer. Their faces were inches apart. Do you hear me? I choose you. Not duty, not the title, not what others expect of me. You. Evelyn looked into his dark, desperate eyes and felt something break inside her. All the walls she had built so carefully, all the rational arguments, all the fears, they all collapsed under the weight of this confession. I love you too, she whispered. So much that it kills me. Richard let out a relieved sob and kissed her. It was a tender, cautious kiss, straight out of a novel. It was desperation and passion, all the pain and longing that had built up. His lips were firm and demanding, and she responded with equal intensity. They kissed in the pouring rain, pressing against each other as if trying to merge into one. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily. Let's go, Richard whispered, pressing his forehead against hers. Right now. Evelyn knew she was ready. She was ready to give up everything, her family, her home, and the future that had been promised to her, for this man and this feeling. Yes, she whispered. Yes, let's go. They ran through the downpour to the carriage holding hands, but when they reached the edge of the forest where it was waiting for them, there was no one there. The coachman had disappeared. The horses had disappeared too. Only the wheel tracks remained in the wet ground. Richard swore. Selena, said Evelyn. She took the carriage. They looked at each other. Then Richard laughed, shortly and bitterly. It seems that fate is not on our side. We'll walk. It's 5 miles to the estate in this rain. I don't care. Evelyn squeezed his hand. I don't care, Richard, as long as we're together. He looked at her and something changed on his face. The fear was gone. Only determination remained. Then let's go, he said. Wherever this road leads. They walked along the wet dirt road in the wind and rain, holding hands, and didn't look back. By the time they reached the estate, it was well past noon. The rain showed no sign of stopping, pouring down stubbornly and monotonously, turning the roads into rivers of mud. Evelyn could barely stand. Her house dress clung to her body, heavy with water. The hem was black with mud. Her hair was completely disheveled, and her plait had come undone. Wet strands clung to her face and neck. Her shoes had fallen apart halfway there. She walked the last mile barefoot, her feet scratched and bruised by stones. Richard looked no better. He had taken off his cloak an hour ago and thrown it over her shoulders, despite her protests. Now he was walking in just his shirt, which was soaked through and clinging to his body, revealing his skin. His hair was tousled, and a mixture of dirt and blood from an old scrape was caked on his cheek. But they walked on, holding hands, stumbling and sinking into puddles. They did not stop because now that they had made their choice, there was no turning back. Willowbrook appeared from behind the trees, gray and gloomy under a leaden sky. Despite the daylight, all the windows were lit, apparently because of the darkness brought by the storm. Several carriages were parked at the front entrance, and Evelyn recognized one of them with horror. That's Dr. Wesley's carriage, she whispered. He was only called in serious cases. Richard squeezed her hand tighter, and they quickened their pace. The hall was in chaos. Servants were running back and forth, someone was shouting upstairs, and maids were crying in a corner. The butler stood by the stairs, pale as death, explaining something to an elderly man in a black frock coat. The doctor. When Evelyn and Richard entered, everyone froze. The butler was the first to recover. Lord Somerset, he said. His voice trembled. Thank God. The Marquise, your mother. What happened? Richard stepped forward and water from his clothes splashed onto the marble floor. She had fainted when she heard what had happened. The doctor is with her upstairs, and your father and the butler are in a state of shock. The Marquis has requested that you report to his office immediately upon your return. Where are Lady Evelyn's parents? Richard asked, still holding her hand. Lord and Lady Astor left an hour ago. The butler struggled to find the words. They took all their belongings and said they no longer wished to have anything to do with the Somerset family. And Lady Evelyn? He looked at her with pity, as if she no longer existed for them. Evelyn staggered. Richard caught her and pulled her close. They had abandoned her. His voice sounded incredulous. They just left. Lord Astor was furious, my lord. He spoke of dishonor and shame, saying that both his daughters had disgraced the family and that he wanted nothing to do with either of them. Evelyn closed her eyes. She had expected anger and accusations, but not this. Not that her parents would simply erase her from their lives as though she were a failed line in a poem. My lord, the butler cleared his throat. Your father is waiting, and he is very angry. Richard stood up straight, squared his shoulders. Evelyn will stay here, he said. Have the maids take her to her room and give her some dry clothes and food. I'll talk to my father myself. No, said Evelyn, clutching his arm. I'm coming with you. Evelyn, we're in this together. She looked him in the eyes. You said it yourself. Wherever the road leads, we'll go together. So now, too. He looked at her for a long time. In his gaze, she could see pain and pride, as well as something else, something like reverence. All right, he said quietly. Together. They climbed the stairs to the second floor. The corridor was long and dark, lit only by a few candelabras. Their footsteps echoed on the parquet floor, and water dripped from their clothes, leaving wet patches behind them. The Marquis's office was at the end of the corridor. The massive oak door with copper handles was closed. Richard knocked. Come in, came a cold voice. They entered. The study was large. It contained dark furniture, oak-paneled walls, and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. The Marquis of Somerset was seated behind a massive desk. He did not rise when they entered. He merely looked at his son with a moaning, icy stare. Close the door, he ordered. Richard obeyed. They stood in the middle of the office, still soaking wet and shivering from the cold, holding each other's hands tightly. The Marquis slowly rose. He was a tall man with gray hair and a straight military posture. In his youth, he must have looked very much like his son. Now, however, his face was lined with wrinkles, and his eyes were cold and lifeless. "You've ruined everything," he said quietly. That silence was more terrifying than any scream. "The engagement is off. Selina Astor has fled to Scotland. The Astor family has publicly announced that it is severing all ties with us. By evening, the whole of London will know about this scandal, and by morning, the whole of England will too. Father, let me explain." "Explain what?" The Marquis walked around the table and came closer. "That you fell in love with your fiancée's younger sister? That you have betrayed our family's honor?" He cast a contemptuous glance at Evelyn for the sake of a lowly girl of no standing. Evelyn paled, but did not lower her gaze. Richard stepped forward and shielded her with his body. "Don't you dare speak of her that way." His voice was low and dangerous. "She is worth more than all the titles and money put together. She is nobody." The Marquis raised his voice. "She is the daughter of an impoverished nobleman who has just been publicly disgraced by both his daughters. She has no dowry, no connections, nothing. And you want to marry her?" "Yes." Richard clenched his jaw. "Yes, I do." "Then you are no longer my son." Dead silence fell. Evelyn could hear her heart beating loudly and painfully. Loudly and painfully. Richard didn't blink. "I accept that," he said evenly. "Do you understand what that means?" The Marquis moved closer, and their faces were now only inches apart. "No money, no title, no inheritance. You will be expelled from the family. Your name will be removed from all documents. You will become a pariah in society. No house will have you as a guest, and no ball will invite you. Your friends will turn away from you. You will be nobody. I will be with her." Richard did not look away, and that was enough. The Marquis looked at his son for a few seconds, then turned and went back to the table. "You have an hour to leave," he said, sitting down. "Take your personal belongings and leave this house." "Forever, father." "No." The Marquis raised his hand. "Not your father anymore. To you, I am now Lord Somerset. You have made your choice. Now, go and live with him." Richard stood up straight and bowed formally. "As you wish, my lord." He turned to lead Evelyn to the door, but his father's voice stopped him on the threshold. "Richard," he said. He froze without turning around. "Your mother will suffer. Very much. Have you thought about that?" Richard's shoulders tensed. Evelyn could feel his hand trembling as it still held hers. "I have thought about it," he replied quietly, "and each time I come to the same conclusion. I cannot live for others, even those I love, because it slowly kills me. I tried. For 10 years, I tried to be who you wanted me to be, and I almost lost myself, Evelyn." He finally turned around and Dia's eyes were glistening with tears. "She brought me back to life. For the first time in 10 years, I feel alive, and I won't give that up, even if it costs me everything else." The Marquis did not reply. He merely turned away from Evelyn and folded his arms behind his back. The conversation was over. The next hour passed in a blur. The maids brought Evelyn a dry dress, a simple dark brown wool one that was clearly someone's old dress. It was a little big, but at least it wasn't wet. They also gave her a warm shawl, stockings, and new shoes. They combed her hair and plaited it. Richard changed into his traveling suit. It was a dark gray frock coat with black trousers and high boots. He packed a small bag with his belongings. He only took a few changes of underwear, a book, his grandfather's pocket watch, and the purse containing the money he had. They met in the hall at the foot of the stairs. The butler silently handed them their cloaks. It was still drizzling outside, but not as heavily. Lord Somerset cleared his throat. "The carriage is ready. It will take you to the stagecoach station. From there, you will have to continue on your own." "Thank you, Williams." Richard shook his hand. "For everything." The old butler nodded, and Evelyn saw tears glistening in his eyes. They went out onto the porch. The carriage was waiting. It was simple, without any coats of arms or gilding. The coachman was sitting on the box and had turned away. Richard helped Evelyn in. She sat down on the worn seat and looked out of the window at the mansion. It was a large, majestic, and beautiful house that could have been her home if things had been different. A figure flashed in one of the second-floor windows. Evelyn recognized the Marquise Eleanor. She stood at the window, holding onto the frame and looking down. Their eyes met. The Marquise raised her hand slowly and uncertainly. It was not a farewell gesture or a blessing, just a sign of recognition. I see you, I know. Evelyn raised her hand too. Then the carriage moved off, leaving the mansion behind and dissolving into the gray, rainy mist. The stagecoach station was crowded and noisy. Travelers huddled under the canopy to shelter from the rain. Vendors offered pies and ale. Hackney cabs shouted out to potential passengers. Richard went to the window and bought 2 tickets. To Togo, he said, returning to Evelyn. From there, we'll take a ship to France. France? She looked at him in surprise. No one knows us there. We can start again. I'll find work as a teacher or a translator, anything. I'm educated and I know languages. We won't be rich, but I don't need wealth. Evelyn interrupted him. I never have. He smiled for the first time that day. I know. The carriage was leaving in an hour. They sat on a bench under a canopy, huddled together. Evelyn rested her head on his shoulder, feeling exhausted. She hadn't slept at all that night, had walked 5 miles in the rain, and experienced such a roller coaster of emotions that it felt as though she had lived a whole lifetime in a single day. Don't you regret it? She asked quietly. What? Everything? The title, the family, the life you lost for me? Richard turned and cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. I didn't lose my life, he said seriously. I found it. What came before was not life. It was a cage. A beautiful gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless. And you set me free. How could I regret that? Evelyn couldn't hold back and began to cry. He pulled her closer, kissing her forehead, temples, and tear-stained cheeks. We'll get through this, he whispered. Together, we can get through anything, Lady Evelyn. They both started and turned around. Standing nearby was an elderly man in a traveling cloak. He was thin, with gray hair, and had kind eyes behind his glasses. Evelyn did not recognize him at first, but then she remembered. Mr. Grayson, my father's solicitor. Mr. Grayson, she exclaimed, quickly wiping away her tears. What are you doing here? Your father sent me. He took off his hat and asked me to give this to you. He held out a sealed envelope. Evelyn took it with trembling fingers. The envelope bore her father's coat of arms. She opened it and took out 2 sheets of paper. The first was a short letter, written in her father's distinctive handwriting. Evelyn, it read, I cannot forgive what you have done. You have disgraced our family and deprived us of the future we had hoped for. However, you are still my daughter, and I cannot allow you to be left on the streets without any means of support. The attached document is a deed transferring a small estate in Devonshire to you. It belonged to your maternal grandmother and was due to be passed on to you after her death. I have merely expedited the transfer. The house is small but in decent condition. There are also several acres of land, and you will receive an annual income from renting out the neighboring fields. This should provide you with enough to live modestly yet comfortably. I cannot and will not give you any more than this. Do not try to contact me or your mother. You are dead to us. Father. Evelyn looked at the letter and tears ran down her cheeks again. But this time they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of relief, gratitude, and forgiveness. Her father hadn't forgiven her, but nor had he left her to die. What is it? Richard asked, reading over her shoulder. When he had finished reading, he hugged her tighter. An estate in Devonshire, he said. That changes everything, Evelyn whispered. We won't have to go to France. We'll have a home. A real home. It's your home, Richard said quietly, from your family. You can live there alone with dignity and independence. She turned to face him, looking him straight in the eye. Or we could live there together as husband and wife. He froze. Evelyn, are you sure? You can still change your mind. You can go to Devonshire and start a new life without me and without scandal. She shook her head. Richard, you don't understand. The estate, the money, a decent life. None of it matters without you. I choose you today, tomorrow, and always until death do us part. He looked at her for a long time, then slowly dropped to one knee right there on the dirty station platform, surrounded by a crowd of strangers. He took a simple gold ring out of his pocket, the one he wore on his little finger, and held it out to her, a memento of my grandfather. Lady Evelyn Astor, he said, his voice trembling, I cannot offer you a title. I cannot give you wealth or position in society. All I have is myself, my heart, my soul, and my love. But if that is enough, marry me. Evelyn fell to her knees beside him, ignoring the dirt, the stares of passers-by, and the rest of the world. Yes, she whispered through her tears. Yes, yes, yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was too big, intended for a man's hand, but to her it was more beautiful than any diamond could ever be. He kissed her right there at the station, among strangers in the drizzling rain. Someone in the crowd applauded, then someone else, and then someone else again. Evelyn could hear laughter, congratulations, and whistles, but to her only he existed, only this moment, only this feeling that filled her chest. When they finally pulled apart, Mr. Grayson was still standing nearby. He was smiling, for the first time in all the years she had known him. Congratulations, he said quietly, and if I may offer some advice, get married quickly, preferably on the way to Devonshire. Priests in small parish churches don't ask unnecessary questions, and by the time the rumors reach Devonshire, you will already be legally married. Then no one will be able to tarnish your reputation. Richard nodded. Thank you for everything. The solicitor bowed and disappeared into the crowd. They did not go to Dower. Instead, they took a carriage south to Devon. The journey took 2 days. They stopped at modest, clean roadside inns where they were not recognized. Richard introduced them as Mr. and Mrs. Weston, a young couple moving to the countryside. No one asked any questions. On the second day, they stopped in a small village with an ancient stone church. The priest was elderly and short-sighted. He married them for a nominal fee and recorded in the church book, Richard Weston and Evelyn Astor are joined in holy matrimony. The witnesses were the local miller and his wife, good-natured people who wished the young couple happiness and weren't interested in their pasts. When they left the church, the rain finally stopped. The sky cleared and the sun broke through the clouds. It was bright and warm, the first sunshine in 3 days. Evelyn stopped at the church door and looked up at the sky. Richard put his arm around her shoulders. What are you thinking about? He asked quietly. About how a month ago I was nobody, a shadow, a little sister that no one noticed. And now, she turned to him with a smile on her lips. Now I'm Mrs. Weston. I have a home, a husband, and a real future, and a scandalous past, he added with a smirk. And a scandalous past, she agreed. But you know what? I don't care. Let London say what they want. Let my parents disown me. Let society consider us a couple. I'm happy. For the first time in my life, I'm truly happy. Me, Richard. Richard. He pulled her closer and kissed her gently and slowly, as though making a promise. Then we did it, he whispered. Against all odds, we did it. The Devonshire estate turned out to be a small stone house on a hill overlooking the sea. It had 3 bedrooms, a living room with a fireplace, a library, and a kitchen. Simple, modest, but cozy. It was surrounded by a garden overgrown with weeds and several acres of land, including an old apple orchard. They spent the first few weeks settling in. Richard repaired broken furniture, cleaned the fireplaces, and tidied the garden. Meanwhile, Evelyn washed the windows and old curtains and organized the library. They worked from morning until night, falling asleep tired but happy. They had no servants, only an elderly housekeeper named Mrs. Bailey from the village, who came once a week to help with the heavy work. There were no balls, no dinner parties, and no visits. Just the 2 of them, the house and the sea outside the window. Life was simple. Richard gave Latin and Greek lessons to the local priest's children in exchange for a small fee. Evelyn grew flowers and sold them at the village market. The income from renting out the land was enough to live a modest life. Not luxurious, but without want. They were happy. 6 months passed. Evelyn was sitting in the garden under an old apple tree, reading a letter. It had arrived that morning with no return address, only a stamp that she recognized immediately. Dear Evie, it began, I am writing to you from Edinburgh, where I have been living for 6 months. Aunt Beatrice turned out to be an amazing woman. She travels, writes, and is independent. I am learning what freedom means from her. I am sorry for everything I said to you at the mill. I was angry, scared, and hurt, but I understand now. You gave me the greatest gift. You showed me that life can be different and that you don't have to follow the beaten track. I hope you are happy. I hope he makes you happy. Please know that I have forgiven you both, your sister, Selena P.S. I met a man, a Scottish artist who is unknown and poor, and I fell in love as I have never loved before. Isn't that ironic? Evelyn smiled through her tears. She folded the letter and pressed it to her heart. Good news, Richard's voice rang out. She turned around. He was coming out of the house carrying a tray with tea and freshly baked bread. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, his hair was tousled, and there was a smudge of flour on his cheek. He looked nothing like the cold aristocrat he had been at the ball 6 months ago. He looked alive. Very good, Evelyn replied. Selena sent a letter. She's happy. Yarad. He sat down next to her on the grass and poured her some tea. Everyone deserves happiness, including her. They sat in silence and sipping tea and looking out to sea. The sun was setting, painting the sky pink and gold. Birds sang in the branches of the apple tree. The wind carried the smell of salt and seaweed. Do you know what I'm thinking? Evelyn asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. What? That this is real life, not balls, not dinner parties, not titles, but this, you, me, the apple tree, the sea, simplicity, freedom, and love. Richard kissed her on the temple. You're right, he whispered. This is life, and it's beautiful. They sat like that until dark, under the stars that lit up the sky one by one. Evelyn thought about how strange fate was, how one glance at a ball could change everything, how real, forbidden, impossible love could destroy an old life and create a new one, how sometimes you have to lose everything to find what is truly important. And that happiness lies not in what you have, but in who you share it with. Richard, she called softly. Yes, thank you. For what? For choosing me, for not letting me go, and for finally making me more than just a shadow. He turned her face towards him, and the stars were reflected in his dark eyes. You were never a shadow, he said seriously. It's just that others were blind. I saw you at first sight, and I always will. He kissed her, and that kiss contained everything. The past, the present, and the future. Pain and joy, loss and gain, love. True, eternal love. Meanwhile, somewhere far away in London, people were still discussing the scandal of the season in mansions and salons. Two sisters who had broken off their engagement. A lord who had renounced his title. An unthinkable, unforgivable disgrace. But here, in a small house on the Devonshire coast under a starry sky, none of that mattered. Here there was only love, and love conquered all.